There is a rule they teach you on the first day at the Palace of Harrogate, before they ever hand you a rifle or a bearskin or the white gloves you will ruin 40 pairs of learning to keep clean. The rule is this: you are furniture. A guardsman at his post sees nothing, hears nothing, wants nothing. You are a column of red wool set against gilded stone, and the world is meant to walk past you as though you were carved there when the palace was built. For 22 years I lived inside that rule, and I was good at it. They called me the wall behind my back, and I took it as a compliment, because a wall does not gossip, a wall does not flinch, and a wall does not, under any circumstances, believe the word of a 9-year-old child over the word of a queen. I am telling you now, in this small room with the fire going and my knees no longer worth the standing they once did, that the rule is a lie. Or rather, the rule is true right up until the moment it becomes the most dangerous thing you could possibly obey. I learned that on a gray morning in the last spring of King Alaric's steady reign, and I learned it from a girl who came to my post in her stocking feet because she had run out of her rooms too fast to find her shoes. Her name was Princess Malin. She was the king's granddaughter through his son Rowan, and she was, at the time, 9 years old and small even for that, with her late grandmother's dark straight hair, and a way of looking at you that made you feel she had already decided whether you were a coward before you opened your mouth. I had watched her grow from a swaddled thing carried past my post to a girl who could name every guardsman by the wear on his boots. She was not a nervous child. That is the first thing I want you to understand, because everything that came after turned on it. When Malin came to me shaking that morning, it was not the shaking of a child who has had a bad dream. It was the shaking of someone who has seen a true thing and understood at once that no one is going to believe her. I was on the interior post at the foot of the west stair, the long marble one that curves up toward the private apartments, where the family lived above and the state rooms lay below. It was not yet 7. The palace at that hour is a held breath, the night staff gone, the day staff not yet swarming, the light coming gray and level through the tall windows, and every sound magnified so that you can hear a footman 2 galleries away setting down a tray. I heard Malin before I saw her. Stocking feet on marble make a particular soft slap, quick and uneven, and I remember thinking a servant's child had got loose, and preparing the flat blank face I would use to send her back where she belonged. Then she came round the newel post and stopped dead in front of me, and I saw who it was, and I saw her face. "You have to listen to me," she said, "not please, not good morning. Just that you have to listen to me," with her small chin set and her eyes too bright. "You have to, because nobody else will, and I'm not going to be quiet about it. I don't care what she says." A guardsman does not answer children. A guardsman does not answer anyone at his post without leave. I looked over her head at the far wall and I said nothing, which is what the rule required, and which I have been ashamed of for the whole of my long life since. She saw me do it. She saw the eyes go past her, and something in her face, I will never forget this, something in her face did not crumple the way a child's does when it is dismissed. It hardened. She had expected it. That was the terrible thing. A 9-year-old had come to the one grown man in that gallery whose whole purpose was to protect the household, and she had already known before she reached me that he would look through her like glass. "Fine," she said very quietly, "then you're the same as all of them." And she turned to go. I want to tell you I broke the rule then out of some great nobility. I did not. What stopped me was a smaller and stranger thing. As she turned, the sleeve of her nightgown fell back, and I saw that her wrist and the back of her hand were stained, not blood, I saw at once, my whole training snapping to attention on that word before I dismissed it, but ink. Dark ink, the deep blue-black of the good stuff, the sort they used in the king's own writing room and nowhere else in the palace, because it was mixed to a private recipe and issued by the ounce. It was smeared across her small hand as though she had pressed her palm flat onto a page that was not yet dry. And children do not go into the king's writing room. That room was locked, and had a guard of its own, and the ink in it was, by long custom, never to be touched by any hand but the king's and his private secretaries. So a rule broke. Not the big one, not yet. A small internal rule, the one that says none of this is your concern. Because ink on that child's hand at that hour was very much someone's concern, and I was the only someone standing there. "Princess," I said. It is not a large word, but I had not spoken at my post in illegitimate circumstance in 11 years, and my own voice startled me. She stopped. She did not turn around all the way. She turned her head, just her head, the way a person does when they have decided not to hope too hard. "You'll only tell me to go back to bed," she said. "I will not tell you that," I said. "Tell me what you saw, quietly. And keep your hand down at your side, out of the light." That last part I added because a footman had appeared at the end of the gallery with the morning coffee service, and I did not, in that instant, want anyone at all to see the ink on the king's granddaughter's hand until I understood what it meant. I did not yet know why I felt that. 22 years of standing still teaches a man to trust the thing in his chest that tightens before his mind has caught up. Mine had tightened. So I got the girl into the shadow of the stair, where the great newel post threw a wedge of dark across the marble, and I stood over her as though I were merely a guardsman shooing a stray, and I let her talk. What she told me in a rush, in a whisper, with her ink-stained hand pressed against her side as I had asked, was this. She could not sleep. She often could not. Since her grandmother, the late Queen Isolde, had died 2 winters before, Malin had taken to walking the galleries at night, and the household had learned to let her, because she came to no harm, and it seemed to comfort her to visit the places her grandmother had loved. She had gone, this night, to the little sitting room that had been Isolde's, a room off the long east corridor that had been kept shut and undisturbed since the Queen's death by the express order of the Crown Prince, her father Rowan, who could not yet bear to have it emptied. Malin had a way in, a servant's door, a jib door papered to match the wall, that the household had forgotten she knew about. She went there, she said, to sit in her grandmother's chair and look at the garden going gray before dawn. But tonight the room had not been empty. There had been a light under the connecting door, the door that joined Isolde's sitting room to the small writing room beyond, the king's private one, which shared a wall with it. And there had been voices. And Malin, being the child she was, had not run. She had crept to the jib door and put her eye to the crack, and she had watched. She saw the queen consort, Morwenna, the king's second wife, whom the household called Her Majesty to her face, and a great many other things behind her back. Morwenna was at the king's writing table, and she was not alone. A man was with her, a tall man in dark clothes whom Malin did not know, with a leather case open on the table and papers spread across it. And the queen consort was writing. She had the king's own pen and the king's own ink, and she was bent over a document copying something slowly with great care, glancing back and forth between the paper under her hand and another paper propped up before her. And the man in dark clothes was watching her hand as she did it, and murmuring, and once he reached over and stopped her and pointed, and said a word Malin caught clearly through the crack. "Lighter." "He told her to make the letters lighter," Malin whispered to me. "Like she was pressing too hard. Why would he say that? Why would you tell someone to write lighter, unless—" She stopped. She was 9. She did not have the word, but she had the whole of it, entire in the shape of her not having the word, and I felt the cold go all the way down my spine because I had the word. Forgery. You do not tell a person to write lighter unless you are teaching them to match a hand that is not their own. You do not copy a document from a propped-up model, in a locked room before dawn, with a stranger coaching your pressure on the page, unless the thing you are making is meant to pass for something a different hand wrote. And the only hand that mattered in that room, the only hand whose weight and slant and pressure the king's private ink would ever be asked to imitate, was the king's. Or the late queen's. Isolde, whose sealed rooms these were. She saw me, Malin said, and now, only now, did her voice shake in the ordinary way, the way a child's does. I made a sound. My hand slipped on the door and it knocked, and she looked up right at the crack, right at my eye, and I ran. And I don't think she knows for certain it was me, but she looked and I touched the door where the ink was. I must have when I caught myself. That's how it got on my hand, and I ran all the way here because you're always here. You're always at the bottom of the stairs, and I thought, she swallowed. I thought a guard is supposed to protect us. Isn't that what you're for? I have turned that question over 10,000 times in the years since. Isn't that what you're for? There is no honest man who wears this uniform who can hear a child, ask it, and go on being furniture. Yes, I said, that is what I am for. And I broke the rule. Breaking it, I have to tell you, is not a grand thing. It does not feel like a trumpet. It feels like stepping off a stair you have climbed so many times in the dark that your feet expect a landing that is not there. My whole body knew where I was supposed to stand and what I was supposed to not do, and I did the other thing, and for one lurching second the floor of my life was gone. Then it came back, and I was simply a man with a duty, and the duty was clear. I took Malin by the shoulder, gently, the way you would steer a spooked horse, and I walked her not up the stairs toward the family apartments, where anyone might be waiting, but down the short cross gallery to the guardroom off the west entrance, where at that hour there would be exactly one man I trusted with my life. His name was Corporal Edrin Vale, and he had served under me 11 years, and he had the one quality you cannot train into a man. He could keep his face still while his mind moved fast. I put the child in the guardroom's one good chair, and I told Edrin to fetch her stockinged feet a blanket and a cup of the sweet weak tea we kept for the tourists who fainted at the summer gate, and to write down nothing, and to let no one, not a chamberlain, not a lady, not the queen consort herself, into that room until I came back. On whose order? Edrin asked low, because he knew as well as I did that I had no order at all, that everything I was doing at that moment I was doing on the authority of my own 2 eyes and a girl's ink-stained hand. On mine, I said, and if it goes wrong, mine alone. You did as your sergeant told you. That's all you did. He looked at Malin, huddled in the big chair with her feet tucked under her and her chin up still, God help her, refusing to cry. And he looked back at me, and something passed between us, the thing that passes between men who have stood a long time in the cold for the same reasons. She's the king's blood, he said quietly. If she says she saw a thing, then a thing was seen. That was Edrin. He had said in 9 words what the whole palace, over the days that followed, would refuse to say in 1,000. I left them, and I went to find out whether a 9-year-old was mad, or lying, or the only person in Harrogate who was telling the truth. The east corridor at that hour was empty. I walked it at the measured pace of a guardsman making his rounds, because a running man draws eyes and a walking one in this uniform draws none, and I came to the door of the late Queen's sitting room. It was shut. It was, I saw as I bent close, still faintly warm at the lock plate, but that meant nothing. The pipes ran behind that wall. I did not go in the main door. I went round the long way to the servants' passage, and I found the jib door Malin had described, papered to match, near invisible unless you knew to look, and I found on its white painted edge, at the exact height a small hand catching itself would strike, a single smeared print of dark blue-black ink, not yet fully dry. So the girl had been there, that much was iron. I stood with my ear to that concealed door for a slow count of 200, and I heard nothing beyond it but the tick of a clock and once the settling groan of an old house. Whoever had been in the writing room was gone. They had heard the knock, seen the eye, and cleared out. Of course they had. That is what guilty people do. I could have opened the jib door then and gone through and searched the writing room for the propped-up model, the leather case, the half-made forgery. I did not. And I want you to understand why, because it is the hinge of the whole thing. I did not go in because I was, at that moment, one man acting entirely without authority, on the word of a child, against the queen consort of the realm. If I opened that door and searched that room and was found doing it, the story that would be told was not a loyal guard uncovered a forgery. The story that would be told, and Morwenna, whatever else she was a genius at the story that would be told, was a guardsman abandoned his post before dawn to break into the king's private writing room, and when challenged, invented a wild tale and dragged a grieving little girl into it to cover himself. I would be the mad one. The child would be the pawn I had used, and every scrap of evidence I laid hands on, having laid hands on it unlawfully and alone, would be poison in any hearing got by a man with no warrant and no witness, and therefore worth nothing, and worse than nothing, because it would make the true thing look invented. 22 years of standing still had taught me that too. The powerful do not fear the truth. They fear the truth arriving in a form that cannot be waved away. My whole task from that moment was to make sure that when this truth arrived, it arrived clean, witnessed, dated, lawful, undeniable, and not as the raving of the wall who had finally cracked. So I did the hardest thing. I walked away from the door. I went back to the guardroom. Malin had drunk half the tea and was arguing with Edrin in a whisper about whether the palace cat was allowed in the guardroom, which told me she was steadier than she had been, because a frightened child does not argue about cats. I crouched down to her level, a thing a guardsman is never, ever supposed to do, so that by now I had broken so many rules I had stopped counting. And I told her the truth, because I had already decided that whatever else happened, I would not lie to this child the way the world was about to. I believe you, I said. Do you hear me? I believe every word. There was ink on your hand from that room, and no one who was only dreaming gets ink on her hand. So I believe you, and I am going to prove it, but I need you to do 3 hard things for me, and they will be harder than what you already did tonight. Can you? She looked at me for a long moment with those 2 old eyes. You're the first grown-up who said the first part, she said. The I believe you part. Everyone else, when I start, they get the face. I know the face, I said. I've made the face at people my whole life. I'm ashamed of it. The 3 things. Tell me. 1. You will not go back to that room or that corridor or anywhere near the queen consort alone, not for any reason, not if she smiles at you, not if she offers you the moon. 2. You will not tell this story to anyone but me and Corporal Vale, and when the time is right, your father, the Crown Prince, and only when I am standing beside you. Not your governess, not your friends, not your Uncle Cassius. I said that name carefully, watching her, because Cassius was Morwenna's son, and if the child had any softness for him, it would matter. She wrinkled her nose. Good. And 3, this is the hardest, when the queen consort comes to you, and she will, and she asks you sweetly whether you were walking last night, whether you saw anything, whether you might have had a bad dream, you will look right at her and you will say, I sleep like a stone, grandmother. I never remember a thing. Her eyes went wide. You want me to lie? I want you to survive long enough for the truth to be safe, I said. There is a difference, and it is the difference between a lie that serves you and a lie that serves the wicked. You told the truth to the one person who needed it, me. Now you keep it, like a coal in a closed hand, until we can set it down where it will burn what it should. Do you understand? She thought about it. She was 9, and she thought about it like a general. If she thinks I saw nothing, Malin said slowly, she stops watching me. And if she stops watching me, you have more room to work. I have served kings. I have stood behind chancellors. I have never in my life seen a mind take hold of a hard thing faster than that child's did in that guardroom before the sun was up. Yes, I said, exactly that. All right, she said. I sleep like a stone. I never remember a thing. She practiced it twice more, flattening her bright face into a bland, childish nothing, and it was so good, so completely convincing, that it frightened me a little, and I thought, they have taught this little girl already, this household, how to hide what she truly feels. And then I thought, no. Grief taught her that. She learned it burying her grandmother. and now she was going to spend it protecting her grandmother's memory, though she did not yet know that was what all of this was about. Because that was the piece I had not told her and would not until I was sure. The forgery, the propped-up model in the king's private hand, the stranger coaching the pressure. I had been turning it over the whole walk back, and a shape was rising out of it, and I did not like the shape at all. Queen Isolde had died 2 winters before of a long illness, and she had died, this was known, if quietly, without her affairs entirely in order. There had been a will. There was always a will. But there had been whispers, in the way there are always whispers, that the late queen's will had never been formally proved, that certain of her private bequests were in dispute, that her jewels and her horse and the very rooms Malin liked to sit in were the subject of a slow, cold argument between the Crown Prince Rowan, who was Isolde's son, and the Queen Consort Morwenna, who had married into the king's bed after Isolde was cold, and who felt, or affected to feel, that a great deal of what had been Isolde should now flow to her own children, to Cassius, and to her daughter Verena, as the household's true future. A forged document, in the late queen's hand or the king's, made in the dead of night. Made now 2 winters on, just as the dispute over Isolde's estate ground toward some kind of settlement. I could not prove a word of it yet, but I could feel it, the way you feel weather changing in an old wound. Someone was manufacturing a piece of paper that would speak, falsely, in the voice of a dead queen or an old king, and would tilt a great deal of money and honor and inheritance one particular way. And a 9-year-old, wandering her dead grandmother's rooms at night because she missed her, had put her eye to a crack and seen it being born. No wonder Morwenna had looked up so fast when the door knocked. It was not a thief she feared in that gallery. It was a witness. And she had seen an eye at the crack, and she did not yet know for certain whose eye it was. I sent Malin up to her rooms at last, escorted not by me. I could not be seen playing nursemaid, but by her own returning governess, whom Edrin summoned with a bland message that the princess had been found sleepwalking and gently steered home, a cover story so ordinary that it would raise no flag anywhere. And then I went back to my post at the foot of the west stair, and I resumed being furniture. And inside the furniture, a man was thinking harder than he had thought in 22 years. I had a witness who could not be seen to be a witness. I had a smear of ink drying on a hidden door. I had a shape I could feel and not prove. And I had against me the second most powerful person in the kingdom, who was cleverer than I was, better connected than I was, and who had a whole household trained to believe that a guardsman is furniture, and a grieving child is not to be taken seriously. The bells rang 7. The palace woke around me, and somewhere above I knew the Queen Consort was already awake, already thinking, already deciding how to find out whose eye had been at that crack, and how to make certain that whatever it had seen would never, ever be believed. She moved faster than I expected. That was my first real lesson in what I was up against. By mid-morning, before I had even come off my watch, a notice had gone round the household staff in the Queen Consort's own hand, pleasant, motherly, entirely reasonable on its face. It read that Her Majesty, in her tender concern for young Princess Malin, who had been observed sleepwalking and wandering the galleries at night in her continuing grief, had directed that the child's night door be watched, that her governess sleep in the adjoining room, and that the princess be gently discouraged from her distressing nocturnal habit, which was, the notice said, plainly a symptom of a nervous condition brought on by her grandmother's death and worsening of late. Read it as a stranger, and it is kindness itself. Read it as I read it, standing in the guardroom with the paper in my hand, and it is a masterpiece. In a single stroke Morwenna had done 4 things. She had put a watcher on Malin, so the child could not wander again, could not witness again, could not slip away to me. She had established in writing before the whole household that the princess was nervous, grief-stricken, prone to night wandering, and by clear implication, to imagining things. She had made herself, on the record, the loving guardian of the child's welfare. And she had laid the foundation, brick by careful brick, for the day when Malin might say I saw something, so that everyone who heard it would already know, would have known for weeks, that the poor grieving girl was not quite herself and saw things in the dark that were not there. She had built the child's cage and called it a blanket. I understood then that I was not fighting a crime. The crime, the forgery, was almost finished, and I might never get near it now that they knew a door had knocked. What I was fighting was a story, and Morwenna had a head start of hours, and she was writing it in ink I could not match, in the voice of loving concern, on paper everyone would sign. If I was going to win, I could not simply produce a fact. I had to produce a fact so hard, so clean, so witnessed and dated and undeniable, that it broke through the story she was building before that story hardened into truth. I began that same day, quietly. Furniture does not investigate, furniture merely stands where things happen to pass by, so I made myself stand where things passed. The first thread I pulled was the stranger, the tall man in dark clothes with the leather case. He was not household. Malin did not know him, and Malin knew everyone. He had been in the king's private writing room at 4 in the morning, which meant he had got past the night guard, which meant either he had climbed in like a burglar, which no one had reported, or he had come and gone by a door someone had opened for him, and a book someone had signed him into. Every soul who enters the private apartments after the state rooms close is entered in the gate porter's night ledger name, hour, and who admitted them. It is the oldest rule in the house and the one no one thinks about, because the porter writes it, and the porter is furniture too. I knew the night porter. His name was Old Wick, and he had held the west door 40 years, and he owed me nothing except that once, a long winter, I had stood his watch for 3 nights running while his wife was dying so that he could be at her bedside, and had never spoken of it. I went to Old Wick that evening, off duty, in plain clothes, with a bottle of the good dark ale he liked, and I did not ask him a single question about the night in hand. I asked him about his knees, and his grandchildren, and the old days, and the winter his wife had died. And near the bottom of the bottle, easy as anything, I asked whether the gentleman from the lawyers had found his way all right the other night, because I'd near tripped over his case in the dark and hadn't liked to say anything. Old Wick, who did not know there was anything to hide because no one had thought to tell furniture to keep a secret, said I, the tall fellow, Mr. Sedge or Sedgwick or some such, came the last 3 nights running, admitted by Her Majesty's own gentleman, signed in proper each time, though it was a queer hour for lawyers' business and no mistake, and left near dawn each time, and would I like to see, he'd the ledger right there. He showed me the ledger. He turned the pages himself with his own old hand in the light of his own lamp, and I read 3 entries in 3 nights, each in Old Wick's plain, honest script, the name Mr. J. Sedgwick, the hours, and admitted by the Queen Consort's gentleman-in-waiting. And on the 3rd night, the night Malin had watched, a small note in the margin, again in Wick's hand, unprompted because he was a careful man. Gentleman departed in some haste, 4.4, said he'd left a case, went back for it. I did not touch the ledger. I did not tear the page. I memorized every word, and then I did the one clever thing I did in that whole affair, and I am prouder of it than of anything I did later with more drama. I said to Old Wick, "That's a fine full record, Wick. You keep a better book than the king's own secretary. I hope you keep the old volumes somewhere safe. A house like this, papers have a way of walking." And Old Wick, bristling with the pride of a man whose one small kingdom is his ledger, told me that every completed nightbook went, sealed and dated, to the master of the household's muniment room, where it was locked away and could not be altered by God or the Queen, and that he'd the current one in hand until month's end, and then it too would go where none could touch it. So there it was. A dated, witnessed, tamper-proof record soon to be locked beyond even Morwenna's reach, of a lawyer named Sedgwick being admitted to the king's private apartments at 4 in the morning, 3 nights running, by the Queen Consort's own man, in the very days when a document was being forged in the king's private ink. It did not prove the forgery, but it proved the meeting. It proved the lie in the sweet motherly notice, because you do not need a lawyer in the writing room at 4 a.m. to comfort a grieving child, and it existed independent of me in an honest old man's hand, soon to be sealed where no one could reach it. I had my first hard fact. Now I needed the second, and the second was more dangerous, because the second lived closer to the flame. I needed to know what document was being forged, and in whose hand and to what end. And for that I could not go to a ledger. I had to go to the law. The dispute over the late Queen Isolde's estate was handled, as all the family's private legal matters were, by the office of the Crown Solicitor, a dry, cautious man named Master Halloran, who had served the house 30 years and trusted no one, least of all guardsmen. I could not walk into his chambers and ask him what was in the late Queen's contested will. He would have thrown me out and reported me by nightfall, and Morwenna would have had her proof that the wall had cracked. But I did not need Halloran to tell me the law. I needed only to understand the shape of the fight, and for that there was a better source, one the Queen Consort would never think to guard, because who watches the watchers of the dead? The late Queen Isolde's rooms, the very ones, were still, by the Crown Prince Rowan's grieving order, kept and dusted and aired by one servant only, an old lady's maid named Bess Corliss, who had served Isolde 35 years, who had dressed her as a bride and washed her as a corpse, and who now moved through those sealed rooms once a week like a ghost tending a ghost. Bess Corliss had loved her mistress. And Bess Corliss, I would come to learn, had been keeping a small, dangerous secret of her own for 2 winters, waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for exactly one honest man to ask her exactly the right question. I found her the next morning in the East Corridor, letting herself into Isolde's rooms with her single key, and I did a thing that under the old rules should have ended my service. I spoke to a servant, at length, near the sealed rooms, where anyone might see. But I had learned already that the old rules were the enemy now, and that furniture that will not move is furniture that lets the wicked win. So I helped her with the tray she carried, and I walked in with her, and I stood in the dead Queen's sitting room where 2 nights before a forgery had been born, and I looked at the chair where a little girl liked to sit and watch the garden go gray, and I asked Bess Corliss the right question. "Mrs. Corliss," I said, "when the Queen, my mistress, was dying, did she ever speak to you about her wishes, about what she wanted after, not the lawyer's version, her own words?" The old woman went very still. She set down her cloth. She looked at me for a long time, measuring, the way Malin had measured me at the foot of the stair, and I understood that grief had taught them both the same wariness, that the world does not want the truth from a grieving mouth, and calls it raving when it comes. "Why," said Bess Corliss at last, "would a guardsman want to know that?" "Because," I said, and I chose the words with care, because everything turned on them, "I have reason to think someone in this house is about to put words in your mistress's mouth that she never spoke. And I would rather hear the real ones from you, while you still can tell them, than let the false ones stand because no one asked." And Bess Corliss, who had washed a queen's body and kept her counsel 2 long winters, sat down slowly in the dead woman's chair, and began, at last, to talk. What she told me changed the whole shape of the thing. Until that morning I had believed I was chasing a forged document, a false will, or a false codicil, some paper Morwenna meant to slip into the record to tilt the dead Queen's estate toward her own children. That was bad enough. But it was, in a way, an ordinary badness, greed dressed as inheritance. What Bess Corliss told me, sitting in her dead mistress's chair with her worn hands folded, was that the true will already existed, that it was real, that Isolde had made it in her last clear weeks and signed it before witnesses, and that it said the opposite of what Morwenna wanted the world to believe. She knew, Bess said. My lady knew what would happen after. She wasn't a fool, whatever they say now, all this talk of nerves and confusion at the end. She was clear as glass to the last week, clearer than the doctors, clearer than that woman. Bess did not need to say which woman. She called me in the last February she was alive, and she told me she had made her will proper and true, and that in it she had provided that her private estate, her mother's jewels, and the rooms and the horse, and a sum besides, should go to her grandchildren by her own son. To Malin, to little Bram, to the children of her blood. Not one thread of it to the consort's brood, she said, and she said it plain, because that woman had wife enough of the king, but should have nothing of her, Isolde's own line. And she had it witnessed and sealed, and she told me where the true copy was lodged in case, she said in case, the version that came out later did not match. I felt the cold again, deeper this time. In case the version that came out later did not match, I repeated. Those were her words, said Bess. She looked at me when she said it. She knew. She knew that after she was gone, someone would try to make a paper that said what she never said. And she made me promise. I've kept it 2 winters. I've told no living soul, because who would believe an old maid over a queen with a crown on her head? She made me promise that if ever a will was read out that gave her line nothing, I was to know it for a lie, and to find someone honest and tell them where the true one lay. And where, I said very quietly, does the true one lie? Bess Corliss looked at me a long, long moment. She was staking her mistress's last wish and her own life and the fate of 2 children on her reed of a guardsman's face. I have been read many times. I have never felt it as I felt it then. Lodged with the diocesan registry at the old cathedral, she said at last, under seal, in the keeping of the precentor, who is a good man and owes no one in this house a favor. My lady lodged it there herself in her own hand, driven out one last afternoon when they thought she was too weak to leave her bed. She wasn't. She made me help her dress, and she went. And she signed the register her own self. And there it sits, where no hand in Harrogate can reach it, waiting for the day someone reads out the false one. There it was, the whole shape of the conspiracy, entire, laid bare in an old woman's steady voice. Morwenna did not merely mean to forge a will. She could not simply produce a false will from nowhere. A will appearing out of thin air 2 winters after the Queen's death would be challenged, examined, doubted. No. What the tall man Sedgwick was coaching her to make, in the King's private ink in the dead of night, was subtler and far more wicked. They meant to produce a document that would look like the missing true will, to have it discovered, found at last among the late Queen's papers, in Isolde's own hand and seal, saying precisely what Morwenna wished it to say, that the estate passed to the consort's children, to Cassius and Verena. And once that false true will surfaced, dated to Isolde's lifetime, in her own imitated hand, with a plausible story of where it had lain hidden, the real will, the one at the cathedral, would appear to be the fraud, the later discovery, the suspicious one. They would turn the truth into the lie and the lie into the truth, and they would do it so well that even the honest precentor's sealed document might be dismissed as the forgery, made to overturn the genuine one Morwenna had planted. That was why the man had said lighter. Isolde had written with a light hand near the end. Her strength was going. To match a dying woman's failing pressure, that is craft. That is a forger who has studied his mark. And the whole plot balanced on a single point of ignorance. Morwenna did not know that the real will existed at the cathedral. She believed Isolde had died with her wishes unrecorded, her estate in dispute, a vacuum into which a convincing forgery could be poured. She did not know that a dying queen, clearer than her doctors, had foreseen exactly this and driven out one last afternoon to lock the truth beyond her reach. Only Bess Corliss knew. Bess Corliss and now me. And in a sense she did not fully grasp Malin, because the child's eye at the crack had turned a secret night's work into a witnessed crime, and given me the thread to pull. "Mrs. Corliss," I said, and my voice was not quite steady, "you have kept faith with your mistress better than the whole of this house. But I must ask you one more hard thing, and then I must ask you to be more careful than you have ever been in your life. Have you spoken of the cathedral will to anyone? Anyone at all? Even a hint?" "Not a soul," she said. "2 winters. I near burst with it, but no." Then no one alive knows it exists except you and me, I said. And that is the one advantage we have, and it is everything. If the queen consort learns there is a real will at the cathedral, she will not stop her forgery, she will race it. She will try to reach the precentor or discredit him, or have the document lost, or produce her false one first and loudest so that when the real one surfaces it drowns. As long as she believes the field is empty, she works at her leisure. The moment she knows it is not, she becomes 100 times more dangerous and quick. So you will tell no one. You will go on dusting these rooms as though nothing has changed. And if she or hers ask you, as they may, whether your mistress ever spoke of a will, you will look at them like the tired old woman they take you for, and you will say the queen never confided such things to a maid. Bess Corliss almost smiled. It was not a happy smile. You want me to lie? The same lie I asked the child to tell, I said, and something turned over in me to hear that the two of them, the oldest and youngest keepers of Isolde's truth, must both now hide it to protect it. A coal in a closed hand, until we can set it where it will burn what it should. She nodded slowly. Then she reached out and gripped my wrist with a strength that surprised me, her old fingers hard as roots. You said it right, she said. You hear me, guardsman, 2 winters I've carried her. You said it right, or I'll haunt you worse than she'd haunt them. I said I would try. It was the only honest promise I could make, and she knew it, and it was enough. I left the sealed rooms with 2 hard facts now instead of 1, the night ledger, and the maid's testimony pointing to a real will at the cathedral, and a plan beginning to form. But I had barely gained the east corridor when I learned that the flame had shifted while I worked, and that Morwenna, who could not know what I knew, had nonetheless sensed a change in the air the way a spider senses a plucked thread, and had begun, very quietly, to close her hand. It was the small things first. My watch was changed. For 11 years I had held the interior post at the foot of the west stair, the post at the heart of the family's coming and going, the post where a wandering child in stocking feet could find me. Now, without explanation, the duty roster moved me to the outer forecourt, the tourist's gate, the least private post in the whole palace, where I would stand under the public eye all day, and could reach no one and no one could reach me. The order came down through the ordinary channels, signed by the captain of the guard, and on its face it was nothing. Guardsmen are rotated all the time. But I had not been rotated off that post in 11 years, and it came 3 days after a door had knocked in the night, and I did not believe in that kind of coincidence. Then Edrin Vale, my one trusted man, the corporal who had said she's the king's blood if she says she saw a thing, then a thing was seen, was granted, suddenly, a compassionate leave he had not asked for, to visit a sick mother who, Edrin told me grimly in a stolen minute, was in the ruddiest health of her life and had been baking that very week. He was to be gone a fortnight, reassigned to the far end of the kingdom before he went, so that he could not even linger in the town. She was pulling my supports out from under me one by one, and she was doing it so smoothly, through such ordinary and unimpeachable channels, that if I complained I would sound exactly like the paranoid, cracking, delusional guardsman she needed me to be. That was her genius. Every move she made was defensible, reasonable, dull. Only when you laid them side by side the child watched, the maid's mistress confused at the end, the loyal corporal exiled, the witnessing guard moved to the gate. Only then did the pattern show its teeth. And no one lays such things side by side. No one but a man who is looking. And she was betting, correctly, that no one was looking but me, and that she could isolate me before I could act. I had, I reckoned, days, perhaps less. Once the forgery was finished and discovered, once the false true will was in the record with all its plausible weight, the moment for a clean interruption would be gone forever. After that I would not be uncovering a scheme. I would be trying to overturn a settled fact, alone, disgraced, and outgunned. I had to reach the truth at the cathedral and bring it into the light in a form that could not be waved away, before Morwenna's paper hardened into history. And I had to do it from the tourist's gate, with my one ally exiled, watched by a household that had been told, on excellent authority, that I was not to be trusted. That night off my new and hateful watch, I did the sum honestly, the way you must before a thing like this. I was one aging guardsman. Against me stood the queen consort, her son Lord Cassius, her gentleman-in-waiting, her tame lawyer Sedgwick, and the whole soft weight of a household that would take her word over mine without a second's thought. I had 2 witnesses who dared not be seen to witness, an old maid and a 9-year-old, and a night ledger that proved a meeting but not a crime. If I moved too soon, I had nothing. If I moved too late, I had nothing. The only path was the razor's edge between, to gather the truth so completely, and deliver it so publicly and so lawfully that the story of the cracked guardsman could not swallow it. I thought of walking away. I will be honest, because I have been honest this whole long telling and will not spoil it now with a hero's polish. I thought of it. I was 51, with a pension coming and a small house waiting and knees that ached in the cold, and every instinct beaten into me across 22 years said the same thing. You are furniture. This is not your fight. Go home. Then I thought of a girl in stocking feet who had looked at me and said you're the same as all of them, and had turned to go, already knowing. And I thought of an old woman's hand hard as roots on my wrist. 2 winters I've carried her. And I found that the man they called the wall had, somewhere in these last few days, stopped being able to walk away from a thing he had promised a child. So the next morning I stood my hateful post at the tourist's gate, immaculate, unmoved, eyes forward, furniture to the last button. And behind the still face I began to build the one thing that could win. Not a fact, but an ambush of facts, a moment, arranged down to the minute, when the truth would arrive all at once, in front of the only person in Harrogate who outranked the queen consort and could not be managed, on a day when she would be certain she had already won. The person I needed was Princess Adela. Adela was King Alaric's sister, the old king's sister, a woman past 60 with a spine like a ramrod and a tongue that had reduced ambassadors to stammering. She held no throne and wanted none, but she held something Morwenna could not touch, the absolute, unquestioned authority of the blood royal, senior to the consort in every way that the household's bones understood. Where Morwenna ruled by charm and management and the king's affection, Adela ruled by being Adela, and no notice in the consort's motherly hand could make Princess Adela believe that a guardsman was mad or a child was nervous if Princess Adela chose, with her own eyes, to look. She trusted almost no one. She despised Morwenna with a cold thoroughness that was the talk of the servants' hall. And crucially, she was the one member of the family whom I could conceivably reach without Morwenna knowing, because Adela kept her own household, her own guard, her own rooms across the garden court, and came and went by her own reckoning. But I could not simply go to her. A guardsman off his post, seeking a private audience with the king's sister, to accuse the queen consort of forgery on the word of a child and a maid. That was the raving wall story in its purest form, and Adela, for all her contempt of Morwenna, was far too shrewd to act on a wild tale from a man who might be a consort's plant sent to embroil her in a scandal. I needed to bring her not an accusation but a proof. I needed the real will in my hand, or as near to it as I could get, before I ever spoke Morwenna's name. Which meant the cathedral. I could not go to the cathedral myself. I was watched now, I felt it, the loitering underfootman near the gate, the friendly question from a chamberlain about how I was finding the fresh air of the forecourt, the sense of eyes. If the wall was seen taking a day's leave and traveling across the city to the cathedral registry, Morwenna would know within the hour that I was hunting near the truth, and she would race, and I would lose. I needed someone invisible to make the approach, someone with an honest reason to be at the cathedral, someone no one would think to watch. I chose Bess Corliss. It was a hard thing to ask, and I asked it plainly. Bess went once a month to the cathedral to lay flowers at the memorial they had raised to the late queen. It was known. It was ordinary. No one would blink. I asked her on her next such visit to carry a letter I would write sealed to the precentor, the good man who kept Isolde's true will under seal, and to give it into his own hand and no others. The letter did not accuse. It did not name Morwenna. It said only that the writer had grave and confidential reason to believe that a false document purporting to be the last will of the late queen might shortly be produced within the household, and it begged the precentor to do three things: to confirm to the bearer that the sealed instrument lodged by the queen in her own hand 2 winters past was safe and untouched, to make, at once, a certified true copy under the cathedral's own seal, attested and dated, and to hold both the original and the copy against a coming reckoning, releasing nothing to any hand from the palace, however high, save on the joint request of the precentor's own conscience, and the king's sister, Princess Adela, whose name I gave as the one clean authority I trusted in the whole affair. Bess went. It was the longest afternoon of my life, standing my post at the tourists' gate, while an old woman carried the fate of everything across the city with a bunch of white lilies in her other hand. She came back at dusk, laid the empty flower paper in a bin as though she'd only been to a grave, passed me at the gate without a flicker. She'd learned her lesson in Cole's enclosed hands better than I could have hoped, and dropped, as she passed, a folded scrap into the pocket of my greatcoat where it hung on the sentry hook. The precentor had written back, 3 lines in a firm clerical hand. The instrument was safe and untouched, lodged and sealed in the Queen's own presence, the register signed by her own hand on the date given. A certified true copy under the cathedral seal was being prepared and would be ready in 2 days, and nothing whatever would be released to any hand from the palace save on the terms I had asked. 2 days, I could hold 2 days. And then this is the false dawn, and I want you to feel it as I felt it, the treacherous warmth of it. For a moment it seemed I would not even need the 2 days, because it seemed the whole thing might resolve itself cleanly, and I might be spared the razor's edge entirely. On the second evening, word ran through the household that the king himself, old Alaric, had been asking after his late daughter-in-law's estate, that the long dispute was to be settled at last, formally, at a family sitting the king would hold in 3 days' time, with the Crown Prince Rowan present and Princess Adela and the Queen Consort and Master Halloran the Crown Solicitor, and the disputed will read out and the matter closed. And for one bright hour I thought, good, better than good. If the will is to be read out at a formal sitting before the king and Adela and the solicitor, then I need only see to it that the real will from the cathedral is in the room when the false one is produced. The truth and the lie side by side, before the highest authority in the land, and the truth in the cathedral's own certified copy, sealed and dated beyond dispute. Morwenna would produce her forgery expecting no rival, and the real will would rise up beside it, and she would be undone in the one place she could not manage, the king's own presence, with his sister watching. The sitting was the ambush I had been trying to build, and the king himself had convened it for me without knowing. For 1 hour I let myself believe it would be so simple. Then near midnight I understood how wrong I was, and it came, as the worst things do, from the mouth of the child I was trying to protect. Malin found a way to reach me. I should have known she would. She was her grandmother's blood and clearer than her doctor's. She could not come to the forecourt, but she could send. She gave a folded note to the one servant she trusted absolutely, the palace cat's keeper, an old groom with no politics and a soft spot for the girl, and the groom, on an errand to the gate, passed it to me with the day's dull word about deliveries, and I read it in the guardroom by lamplight, and my blood ran cold. The note was in a child's careful hand, and it said, "She asked me, the grandmother woman." She sat me on her knee and gave me sweets and asked me all soft, was I sure I didn't walk the night the maid found me sleepwalking? Was I sure I didn't see anything or hear anything or have a bad dream? And I said what you told me. I sleep like a stone, I never remember. And she smiled, but she watched my eyes the whole time, and I don't think she believed me all the way. And then she said, and here the child's careful hand pressed harder, the letters darker. The way I had once pressed at a door I should not have opened, she said, so gentle it was worse than shouting. You know, sweet one, the sitting is in 3 days, and after it everything about your poor grandmother will be settled and put to rest at last, and no one will need to worry about old sad papers ever again. Won't that be nice? To have it all settled, before anyone says anything they can't take back. Before anyone says anything they can't take back. She had not been fooled, or not fully. She suspected the child had seen, suspected the child had spoken, could not prove to whom, and she had just told a 9-year-old in words soft as a lullaby that after the sitting it would be too late to matter. It was a threat wrapped in sugar, and it told me two things at once, both bad. First, that Morwenna would produce her forgery at that very sitting, 3 days hence, and mean to have it accepted, and the estate settled and closed on the spot, so that everything after would be mere raving against a done deed. And second, that she was watching the child too closely now, and the child's fear told me the cage was tightening, and that whatever I meant to do, I had better do it at the sitting itself in the open, all at once, because there would be no after. The false dawn burned off. This was not going to resolve itself cleanly. Morwenna was not walking into an ambush. She was walking into a sitting she had helped arrange, confident, armed with a forgery she believed had no rival, holding a threat over a child, having isolated the one guardsman who knew. And if I got a single thing wrong, if my copy from the cathedral arrived an hour late, if Adela would not hear me, if the king's tired old mind took the smooth, managed version over the wild one, then it would be Morwenna's truth that was read into the record forever, and the real will, when Bess or I finally produced it, would look like the desperate forgery of a disgraced guard and a fired maid and a nervous child. Everything now hung on 3 days, one certified copy, and my getting the truth into the one room, at the one moment, before the one person, in the one form that could not be waved away. I had built toward exactly this. Now I had to spring it, and I would get only the single chance. The certified copy came back from the cathedral on the 2nd day, as promised, carried by Bess Corliss in the false bottom of her flower basket, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with the great red wax seal of the diocesan registry, and tied with the precentor's own ribbon. I did not open it. I did not need to. Its power lay precisely in its being untouched, unopened, its seal unbroken, a thing whose authority I could not have counterfeited or contaminated even had I wished to. I hid it where no palace hand would look, inside the guardroom, in the base of the great brass ceremonial drum that had not been played in 40 years and was too heavy to move, wedged in the shadow beneath the drumhead. Then I turned to the last and hardest piece, Princess Adela. I had one day, and I could not go to her openly. But Adela, it happened, walked her dogs each morning at first light along the garden court, a fixed habit, a rigid old woman's rigid pleasure, 4 spaniels and a stick and no attendant she could not outpace. And the garden court, by the mercy of the same duty roster that had exiled me to the forecourt, could be seen from a corner of the outer wall where the tourist's path ran close. It was not my post. But a guardsman may, between watches, walk the wall to the guardroom by more than one route, and if his route, one gray morning, happened to bring him past the low garden gate at the moment the king's sister was scolding a spaniel out of the tulips, why, that was chance, and chance is a thing even Morwenna could not prove. I did not accost her. That would have been fatal, the outraged report, the raving wall story handed to Morwenna gift-wrapped. Instead, I did the thing my whole training had made me. I stood at the garden gate at attention, immaculate, and when Princess Adela's cold eye fell on me, and it fell on me at once because she noticed everything, I did not speak. I saluted correctly, and then I held out, flat on my white-gloved palm where she could see it and no one at a distance could, a single small object. It was the late Queen Isolde's own signet, a thing Bess Corliss had given me the night before, from the sealed rooms, one of the few of her mistress's private treasures the old maid had kept back and hidden through 2 winters of dispute. A small worn ring with Isolde's personal device, a thing every soul of the blood royal would know on sight, a thing no guardsman had any earthly business holding, a thing that said, more loudly than any words, "This concerns your dead sister-in-law, and it is real and it is grave, and I have not come to you empty or mad." Princess Adela stopped. She looked at the signet on my palm, she looked at my face. And where a lesser royal would have called the watch, Adela, who had buried a husband and outlived 2 brothers and read the true nature of 100 courtiers across 60 years, did the thing that saved everything. She said, in a voice pitched for me alone, cold and level and quick, "You have 30 seconds, guardsman, and if you waste them I will have you broken, and if you do not waste them I will listen. Which is it?" I did not waste them. "Highness," I said, low and fast, eyes forward as though I were reporting the weather, "the will to be read at the sitting tomorrow is a forgery, made this past week in the king's private ink by the queen consort's hand, coached by a lawyer named Sedgwick, admitted 3 nights running by her gentleman, entered in Old Wick's night ledger which goes sealed to the muniment room. The true will of the late queen your sister-in-law is real, lodged 2 winters ago in her own hand under seal at the diocesan registry, and it leaves her estate to her own grandchildren, not to the consorts. I hold a certified copy under the cathedral seal, unopened. I have 2 witnesses who dare not speak until they are safe, the maid Corliss, and the child Malin, who saw the forgery made and has been threatened into silence with sweets. I am one man, watched and moved off my post so I could not reach you. I did not come to accuse. I came to ask you to be in the room tomorrow with your eyes open, and when the will is read, to demand, as only you can, that it be compared against the sealed copy at the cathedral before it is entered. That is all. Compare the 2. The truth will do the rest. I stake my life and my honor on it, Highness, and I have staked a great deal already, and so has an old woman, and so has a little girl who would not stay silent." Silence. The spaniels snuffled in the tulips. Somewhere a fountain ran. Princess Adela reached out, unhurried, and took the signet ring from my palm, her sister-in-law's ring, closing her old fingers over it, and she looked at me for what felt like a year. "The child," she said at last. "Malin, you say she was threatened." "Softly," I said, "the worst way. She was told that after the sitting nothing could be said that could be taken back." Something moved in that iron old face. I understood later that of all I had said, that was the thing that turned her, not the ledger, not the seal, not the forgery, but a 9-year-old told in a sweet voice that her silence had a deadline. Adela had no children. She had, I would learn, wanted them long ago, and had made instead a lifetime's stern fondness for the children of the house, and Malin above all, in whom she saw her dead brother's dead wife steal. "I have watched that woman," Adela said, so quietly it was almost to herself, put her hand on everything that was Isolde's, 1 thread at a time, and smile while she did it and dare anyone to name it. And I have said nothing because I had nothing but my dislike, and a royal must not act on dislike. She closed her fist harder on the ring. "You have given me more than dislike, guardsman. You have given me a thing to compare. Be it on your head if it is false." "It is on my head, Highness." "Gladly. Then go back to your post before we are both seen, and do nothing more and speak to no one, and above all keep that child out of that room until I send for her. Tomorrow I will do what only I can do. If your seal holds, her old mouth thinned, that woman will wish she had never touched a pen." And she turned and whistled up her dogs and walked on into the gray garden as though a guardsman at a gate had told her nothing at all, and I saluted her retreating back and went to stand my hateful post with my heart going like the ceremonial drum, and I thought, it is done. It is out of my hands. It rests now on an old woman's word and a sealed paper and the king's tired judgment. I have done all a man can do. I was wrong that it was out of my hands. There was one thing more I would be called to do, and it would be the hardest of all, and it would come the next day in the one form I had not prepared for. The sitting was held in the king's small council room, not the great throne room but the intimate one, paneled in old oak, where the family settled its private business away from the court. I was not summoned to it. Why would I be? A guardsman stands outside such rooms. He does not enter. And Morwenna had seen to it that the guard on the council room door that day was one of her own creatures, a young sergeant named Pell who owed his stripes to her patronage and would report to her every soul who came and went. I could not get in. I could not even get near. I had built the whole ambush, and I was to be shut outside the door of it, furniture in the corridor, while the truth I had gathered lived or died in a room I could not enter. But I had not been idle in the night. I had one card left, and it was the child. I had told Adela to keep Malin out of the room. I had meant it. But in the small hours I had come to understand something about the shape of what would happen inside, and I had sent word by the cat's keeper, by the old groom, by the one clean channel left to me, to Princess Adela, 3 words only, that I prayed she would understand and heed. Let the child speak. Because I had realized that the ledger and the seal and the maid's account, powerful as they were, all rested finally on paper and on the word of servants. And Morwenna would have an answer for paper. She always did. She would call the cathedral copy itself a forgery, a trick, a plot of the consort's enemies. But there was one thing she could not answer, one witness whose account did not rest on any paper and could not be dismissed as a servant's grudge or a rival's plot, the eyewitness. The child who had put her eye to the crack and watched the forgery made. If Malin, in that room, before the king and Adela and her own father Rowan, said clearly what she had seen, the pen, the ink, the propped-up model, the man who said lighter, then the cathedral copy would cease to be a rival document and become the confirmation of a child's eyes, and no amount of Morwenna's smooth management could turn an honest little girl's plain account into a plot. It was a terrible thing to ask, to put a 9-year-old in that room, in front of the woman who had threatened her, and ask her to speak. Everything in me that had promised to keep her safe rebelled at it. But I had also promised her something else at the foot of the stair, when I crouched to her level and broke every rule. I believe you, and I am going to prove it. And I had come to understand that proving it in the end might require the one thing the whole household had spent a week trying to prevent, that the girl who refused to stay silent be allowed, at last, in the one room that mattered, to speak. The rest of it I did not see with my own eyes. I stood outside the council room door beside Morwenna's creature Sergeant Pell, furniture in the corridor, and I have only the accounts of those who were within Adela's, given me privately after, the Crown Prince Rowan's, and in her own bright, unforgettable words, Malin's. But I have pieced them together across the years until I can see it as though I had stood in the corner of that oak-paneled room, and I will tell it to you now as it happened. The king sat at the head of the table, old Alaric, tired and courteous and wanting more than anything, for the thing to be settled so his family would stop bleeding over a dead woman's rings. To his right sat the Crown Prince Rowan, Isolde's son, grief still on him like a coat he could not take off. To the king's left sat Princess Adela, straight as a blade, her hands folded on the table, and one of them, though no one knew it, closed over a small worn signet ring. And across from Adela, serene, beautifully composed, a picture of a loving stepmother doing a sad duty, sat Queen Consort Morwenna, with her son Lord Cassius at her shoulder, and laid before her on the table a folded document. Master Halloran, the dry, cautious crown solicitor, opened the sitting as such things are opened, with the long history of the dispute, the estate of the late queen, the jewels and the horse and the rooms, the 2 winters of argument. And then Morwenna, at the proper moment, with a small sad sigh, said that she believed the whole matter could be laid to rest, for a document had come to light found, only this week, among the late queen's private papers, in a place long overlooked, and she believed it to be the true last will of the queen in the queen's own hand, and she wished it read, that Isolde's real wishes might at last be honored, whatever they might prove to be. And she said this last with such tender resignation, as though she braced herself to hear the dead woman cut her own children out, that Rowan, God help him, looked at her almost with gratitude. She had staged it perfectly, a grieving stepmother producing the dead queen's own words, ready to abide by them, Halloran took the document, examined the seal, examined the hand, and he was honest, but he was not a forger's match, pronounced that it appeared genuine in the late queen's hand and properly sealed. He began to read it. And it said, in Isolde's own imitated failing hand, that her estate, her mother's jewels, the horse, the rooms, a great sum besides, should pass to Lord Cassius and Lady Verena, the children of the king's second marriage, whom the late queen had come in her final wisdom to love as her own. It was a lie in a dead woman's mouth, and it was about to become law. That was the moment. Halloran finished reading. The king sighed and reached for the pen to enter it and close the matter. Rowan sat stunned, unable to believe his mother had signed her own blood away, and unable, because grief makes us doubt ourselves, to be certain she had not. Morwenna lowered her eyes in perfect sorrow. And Princess Adela said, into the settling silence, "No." One word. The king's hand stopped over the pen. "Before that paper is entered," Adela said, and her voice was the cold ring of steel drawn slow, "it will be compared. There is lodged under seal at the diocesan registry in the cathedral an instrument said to be the true last will of the late queen, my sister-in-law, lodged there by her own hand. 2 winters past, in her own presence, the register signed with her own name on a date I can give you. A certified copy under the cathedral seal is in this palace as I speak. Before we make Isolde's wishes law, we will lay her 2 wills side by side, and we will see which one she truly wrote." The room, they tell me, went very still. And Morwenna, this is the part I treasure, because it is where the smooth cracked at last. Morwenna's serene face did something it had not done in the whole 2 winters of her scheming. It slipped. For one instant, before she caught it, there was on the queen consort's face the look of a person who has just heard the one thing she had built her entire plot on the certainty of never hearing. Because Morwenna had staked everything on the belief that Isolde had died with her wishes unrecorded, that the field was empty, that there was no rival, that a forgery poured into a vacuum could never be checked against a truth, because no truth existed. And now the king's sister had just named a sealed will at the cathedral, in the dead queen's own hand, and Morwenna knew, in the space of that one slipped instant, that she had forged a lie to match a document she did not know existed, and that when the 2 were laid side by side, hers would be revealed as the invention it was. She rallied fast. She was magnificent even in ruin, I will give her that. She said it must be a mistake, a confusion, that no such document existed, that if some paper had been lodged it was surely itself a forgery, planted by enemies to overturn the genuine will she had brought, and here she made her one error, the error the whole thing had turned on from the start, because she said, "And who has told you this, sister? On whose word do we halt the king's business? Some servant's tale, some grieving fancy. I will not have this poor family torn apart on the word of a maid or a night porter or," and she stopped, one breath too late, "or a nervous child." Or a nervous child. No one in that room had said a word about a child. Princess Adela let the silence do its work. Then she said very quietly, "Who spoke of a child, Morwenna?" And into that silence, because Adela had heeded my 3 words, had them ready, had the door opened at the one right moment, came Princess Maelin. She walked in on her own 2 feet, in her proper shoes this time, her chin up, her dark straight hair brushed, 9 years old and steadier than every grown soul in that room. She had been told she need not do this, that she could stay away, that no one would think her a coward. And she had said, "Adela told me this, and I have kept it like a coal in my own closed hand ever since," she had said. "I already stayed quiet once because a grown-up told me to, and it was the hardest thing I ever did, and I only did it because he promised the quiet would end. It's ended now. I want to speak." And she spoke. She stood before her grandfather, the king, and her father, the crown prince, and her fearsome greytan, and the woman who had threatened her over sweets, and she told it plainly, in a child's clear words that no forger could imitate and no manager could smooth away. How she walked the galleries at night because she missed her grandmother. How she went to the sealed room to sit in the chair and watch the garden go gray. How there was a light and voices. How she put her eye to the crack and saw the grandmother woman writing at the king's own table with a man in dark clothes watching her hand. How he told her to press lighter. How she knocked the door by accident and ran. And how, days later, the grandmother woman had sat her on her knee and given her sweets and told her, soft as anything, that after the sitting nothing could be said that could be taken back. But that's not true, Malin said, and she looked straight at Morwenna when she said it, 9 years old and unafraid at last. You can always take back a lie. You just have to tell the truth louder, so I'm telling it. My grandmother didn't give her things to your children. I saw you make the paper that says she did. I saw you. I have stood in the presence of kings, and I have heard great oaths sworn and great sentences passed. And I have never heard anything in my life with the weight of those 5 words spoken by a child in an oak-paneled room. I saw you make the paper. They sent for the cathedral copy that hour. It was brought, I carried it myself, from the base of the old brass drum where I had hidden it, and I gave it into the king's own hands with its seal unbroken, and the honor of that walk down the corridor, and through the door I had been shut out of I would not trade for a general's stars. The precentor came in person the next day, and old Wick's night ledger was fetched sealed from the muniment room, and Bess Corliss gave her account of her dying mistress's words, and Sedgwick the lawyer, once it was clear the whole thing was unraveling, did what such men always do and turned on his employer to save his own skin, confessing the forgery in exchange for mercy. The 2 wills were laid side by side before the king and the solicitor and an independent examiner brought from outside the house entirely. And it was not even close. The cathedral will was true, the ink, the hand, the seal, the witnesses, the dated register all sound. The other was a clever, wicked lie, made in stolen ink at 4 in the morning by a woman coached to press lighter, to steal a dead queen's love from her own grandchildren. The estate passed as Isolde had truly willed it, to Malin, to little Bram, to the children of her own blood. Her mother's jewels, her horse, the rooms where a girl liked to watch the garden go gray. Every thread of it came home. As for Morwenna, the king, who wanted peace above all things and got instead the ruin of his own second marriage, did what the law and his honor required, quietly and without the public spectacle she had always been so good at managing. There was no scaffold in this story. That is not the kind of tale it is, and the child was kept far from any of it. But the queen consort's power in that house was broken past mending. She was stripped of her offices and her keys and her voice in the family's affairs, her son Cassius sent from court, her tame lawyer disgraced. She kept her title, for the king would not shame his own name by unmaking her publicly, but she was from that day a queen in name over an empty room, watched, distrusted, finished. The woman who had spent 2 winters putting her hand on everything that was Isolde's ended with nothing of Isolde's at all, and the household that had trained itself to take her word over a guardsman's and a child's learned, all at once and forever, what her word was worth. And me, I was the last thing anyone thought about, which is exactly as it should be, and exactly as I wanted it, but not quite the last. On the evening it was all settled, Princess Adela sent for me, openly this time, to her own rooms across the garden court, and she gave me back nothing, took nothing, offered me no reward because she understood me well enough by then to know I would have hated one. She only said, "You broke a great many of your rules, guardsman." And I said, "Yes, Highness." And she said, "Good. A man who will not break a wrong rule for a right reason is not a guard. He is a fence." And she gave me a look that was as near to warmth as that iron old woman ever came, and dismissed me, and that was the whole of my commendation, and it was worth more to me than a chest of medals. The king restored me to my old post at the foot of the west stair. Corporal Edrin Vale came back from his sudden exile with a knowing look and a handshake that near broke my fingers. Old Wick kept his ledger prouder than ever. Bess Corliss laid down her long secret at last and, I think, slept easier for it, having kept faith with her mistress to the end. The sealed rooms were opened and aired, and Rowan could at last bear to have them lived in, and they became, this pleases me more than I can say, Malin's own, her grandmother's chair and all, so that the girl who had gone there at night to grieve now sat there by day in the light, in rooms that were truly and lawfully hers. I stood my post at the foot of the west stair for 4 more years, until my knees gave out and they pensionied me to this small house with this good fire. And in those 4 years, more times than I can count, a girl in proper shoes, growing tall now, then taller, then near a woman, would come down that curving marble stair, and she would pass my post, and she would not walk by me as though I were furniture. She would catch my eye just for a heartbeat and give me the smallest nod, and I would give it back. It was against every rule. I did not care. We had a thing between us, the girl who would not stay silent and the guard who finally listened, that no rule in that palace was ever going to touch. I have thought in my long, idle evenings by this fire about what it was that turned it. Not the ledger, though the ledger mattered. Not the cathedral seal, though without it we'd have had nothing. Not even Adela's steel or the king's honor. It was a 9-year-old in stocking feet who came to a wall of red wool at dawn and said, "You have to listen to me." And who, when the wall looked through her the way the whole world had already taught her it would, did not crumple and did not run all the way, but turned back and gave the wall one more chance to be a man. They teach you, the first day, that you are furniture, that you see nothing and want nothing and let the world walk past. I obeyed that for 22 years and I was proud of it. And I have spent the rest of my life grateful that on one gray morning I disobeyed it, because the whole of my honor, everything I will be remembered for if I am remembered at all, hung on the single moment when I stopped being a wall and became, instead, the one grown man in that gallery who was willing to hear a child out. She refused to stay silent. That was her courage, and it was the whole of it, and it was enough. All I did, all any of us did, the maid and the porter and the old princess and the tired king, was finally, at last, decide to listen. And that, I have come to believe in my old age by this fire, is the only thing a guard is truly for.